Before we get started, I'd like to show you what the difference is between a synthetic, blend, and natural brush. A synthetic has a lot of spring, but it doesn't hold a lot of water. And how you can tell is if you bend your brush and look at the hair, it has a consistent shine to it. And if you try to do a painting with it, you can have a lot of control, but you'll lose water quickly, just like you can see right here. So what happens when you're trying to do a painting with this, since it's stiff, it can easily lift some of the previous layer and not lay down enough color. Now if you used a Sable Synthetic Blend brush, you'll have some of the control and more water holding ability. This way, when you're doing a painting, since it has some of the natural hair, it'll be softer and you're less likely to pick up the previous layer, and the brush releases more water and color. So for the particular painting that we'll be doing, if you could only choose one brush, a Sable Synthetic Blend would be a really good one to have. And how you can tell is if you bend the hair, and if it doesn't completely spring back to shape, it's more than likely a blend brush. The other brush that we have is a natural brush. It doesn't have to be the most expensive Kolinsky brush, but this one has a combination of different kinds of natural hair. So it has some Russian Fitch, some ox hair, some squirrel, along with Kolinsky. Now if you took the blend brush and bend it over, you would see an inconsistency in the hair, not the same kind of shine that you would see in the synthetic brush. And with a natural brush, if you wet the hair and bend the tip, it has a tendency to really stay flopped over. Now if you use a natural brush that has a combination of different hairs, it'll be able to spring back to form fairly quickly, and the ox hair in it gives it the spring that we need. And when you try to paint with it, it'll hold the most amount of water and color. The problem is I don't usually use this brush to paint with. I use it more to apply water and soften edges of color. And the reason for that is because if you're not careful and you're using this brush, or any natural brush, if you're not aware of how much water you have on the tip and you continue to paint with it, you can easily add too much water, which will give you those unintentional blossoms and hard dark rings around the color. Your brushes and tools make all the difference to your success. And I like to use all three of them, but I basically use the Sable Synthetic Blend and natural brush. When painting, I like to have an old terry cloth towel underneath my palette. This way my brushes don't roll around and it soaks up any excess water. Now if you've never set up your palette before, you want to make sure that you have a large area in the center for mixing color. When using a new palette, it has a tendency to pill up and bead in the center. So all you need to do is, before you add any color, is either use a little soft scrub or a Mr. Clean eraser and gently buff the center. That way it breaks up that surface shine. Then the color will be more in a puddle and easier for you to see and use. As you may have noticed, my wells aren't very clean. They're pretty polluted with other colors. But that's okay. I can always clean them out as I go along. Now, I don't like to fill the wells up with color. I always like to add to the existing color when I start a new painting. I like the creamy consistency of the tube color when I apply a new wash. Now, when setting up your colors, you can always set it up like a color wheel. That way, the color on the opposite side, when mixed together, will create a neutral gray. Unfortunately, my palette is not exactly set up that way, because this is the way I did it when I first started out, and I've never changed. Basically, I have it set into families of color, working my way around the palette, and you also want to leave some empty wells in between, because that way, if you have particular color mixtures or other brands or colors that you want to try, you have space for them. I also like to use a shallow well palette. What that means is that the well doesn't have a deep angle to it. The reason for that, if it has a deep angle to it, it has a tendency to accumulate a lot of water. and then it actually dilutes the color, so when painting, you don't really have that really rich, bold intensity. A shallow palette allows me to control the water just a little better. And when I say shallow well palette, what that means is that it just is a little flatter. It doesn't have an angle. Now let's talk about paper. I like to use either 140 pound or 300 pound cold press paper. If you notice in the corner, you'll see the watermark. And that's only if you're buying it by the sheet. What a watermark means is that's the name of the manufacturer, and the top side of the paper is the felt side where the watermark is spelled correctly. But when painting, you can actually paint on either side. But personally, I like to use the top side. Here I want to show you how to tear the paper, because this can be a dilemma for many artists. Now, not all papers can tear as easily. I like to use Arches paper. And when folding, I like to use the top side, the one with the watermark, and fold it in half. The reason for this is depending on how you tear it, sometimes you can have a little snap in the seam, and I'd rather have that on the back. So that's why I like the front side to front side option better. So once you've broken down the fold a little bit, start a little tear along the seam. Now you can always apply pressure to one side while you're tearing. Or another really nice option to do is to just pinch the paper, hold it at an angle, and then just apply pressure and allow it to tear itself, just like magic. This even works well for 300-pound paper. Now this won't necessarily work very well for all brands, because some have a different type of surface texture, and some will have a softer sizing. And one way to tell is if it has a softer sizing, the paper feels a little more velvety. A harder sizing, it feels more durable. For papers that have a softer sizing, it can be more challenging to do the techniques that we're going to do. The reason for that is that the color has a tendency to absorb more into the paper rather quickly. And with a harder sizing, it allows the color to move around a little longer on the surface. Now it doesn't mean that one paper is better than the other. It just means that some techniques work better on some papers than others.